Good evening, everyone. I'm David Suddjian. Welcome to Bird Bombs, helpful bursts of ID info. This is episode 33, and tonight is a CBC explosion. That's Christmas Bird Count Explosion. And I'm joined tonight by Laura Stedman and Gigi Zarzuela. They'll be leaping in a little bit later to help with our review and kind of quiz discussion parts of our presentation as we figure out to apply what we're learning as we go along. And also, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use our chat, and we'll have some time at the end of our presentation tonight to consider any questions or comments you may have. So CBC explosion, we're right at the cusp of the beginning of the CBC season for this 2024-25 season beginning this Saturday. Here's a little map showing Christmas bird count circles all across Colorado. And we see a lot along the Front Range and generally along the eastern edge of the mountains, and then scattered thinly across out in the eastern prairie, and a little more in the western Colorado, especially around some of the population centers out there. Lots of different Christmas bird counts to choose from. And if you've never participated in a Christmas bird count, I recommend you give it a try. It's a great way to contribute to a long-term continent-wide monitoring program, which is unique and it's always a lot of fun. Sometimes the weather doesn't always cooperate, but those can be some of the best birding days. So if you haven't gotten involved, check out the Audubon Christmas Bird Count page, and you can find your way to contact one of the people in charge of one of the counts. So check that out. And when you go out on a count, it's always really fun to see rare birds. But the real point is to count the birds that are out there, and we want to get it right. So tonight in our bird bombs, we're going to focus on ID challenges that many birders will encounter during the Christmas bird counts and in our winter birding in general. So these are kind of common core ID challenges that we get to deal with. All right, so let's leap right into it and consider what are these winter ID challenges we're going to focus on tonight. The first is going to be our sharp-shinned and Cooper's hawks. This is a perennial challenge, even for skilled advanced birders. You often will find ones that will give you pause to figure out what you're looking at, and then especially for newer birders and so on. This pair is really a core ID challenge that we deal with on a regular basis, and we're going to spice it up with a little cameo appearance by northern goshawk, which is a real possibility over a large part of Colorado. So goshawk is a kind of on the rare side. Then we have the hairy and downy woodpeckers. They are really two birds that look a lot alike. Now, there's some differences obvious in these two that I have pictured right here, and we'll talk more about that. But a great species pair that we encounter a lot that we can sometimes be challenged by. How about the house and Cassin's finches? We all know house finch really well, right? Cassin's finch is pretty familiar to a lot of people depending on where you live. But for newer birders and for a lot of birds, like, oh, I would really love to see a Cassin's finch. Am I seeing one? Have I found one yet? So it's good to get those sorted out and hope for purple finch will make a cameo appearance for us tonight as we consider them in our ID mix with those finches. Then we have these two sparrows. These are two of our most common sparrows during the winter time, the white-crowned sparrow and American tree sparrow. As you can see, they actually do present a pretty good little ID challenge, and good to get those sorted out as two of our more frequent ones. And we'll throw in the little chipping sparrow, which is really quite rare during the winter, but one that could be easily confused. And sometimes claims of chipping sparrow really are one of the other. So we'll take a look at that. And then one of my favorite ID comparisons, the American crow and common raven. And we get to ask these questions that are not really keyed on particular field marks, but is it beautiful? Is it doing something interesting? And you may be saying, well, now wait a minute, house finch, downy woodpecker, white-crowned sparrow, these are some of our most common birds. I already know these pretty well, and that may be, but what I come back with on that point is the better you know the birds you know best, the better the birder you will become. So these are our core things that we want to know really well. These are reference species that help us to pick out something that's not quite fitting what we see for those species. So really good to know them really well. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Here's our CBC focus group for tonight. These are the different species we're going to focus on. And you'll notice that I've highlighted a few of these in purple, if you will. And these are ones that are rare species. Now, the goshawk is not rare in the same sense as the other two during the winter. It's expected over its range, but they're thinly distributed and not very many of them get seen. And so it's kind of rare in that sense. The purple finch is definitely a rarity during the wintertime in Colorado, but one that does churn up and we want to look for it and be aware of it. And chipping sparrow, also very rare during the wintertime. The regular species can be found over lots of parts of Colorado, and these are things that we expect to encounter depending on where we are, on a regular basis. The rare species, though, when you encounter them on the Christmas bird count or otherwise in your eBird list, it's good to document these things with notes and photographs if you have those. So for those who are concerned about the taxonomy, I'm using the genus Accipitor here, which is going to be different from what you see in eBird now, for example, which has the genus Aster instead now due to different taxonomy. I'm following the Colorado State Bird List here for right now, which differs from eBird in that regard. So we won't worry about that because we all know what we're talking about. So let's leap right into it with Accipitor 101, which sounds a lot better than Aster 101. So we'll just kind of begin with a little comparison right away, real short, to two other main raptor groups that we might see. The accipitors having short rounded wings and a long tail adapted for moving through trees. Bootios are open country hawks. They're bigger with long, broad wings, short, broad tails, right? We're familiar with those, red-tailed hawk. Falco, the falcons, long pointed wings and relatively long tail. So different shapes for some similar birds that we might encounter out in the field. So let's dig into it a little deeper with our sharp-shinned hawk here in our four pictures. And we're going to see that we have immature birds on the left and adult birds on the right. And there are some differences that are consistent among the two sharp-shinned and Cooper's hawk species. So the immature accipitors are brown above versus blue-gray above on the adult. The immatures have streaked underparts, so the markings kind of go vertical, and the adults have barred or sort of a horizontal pattern so we've got streaked brown markings and barred reddish markings on the adult. The eyes tend to be pale in the young birds and darker colored in the adult birds. So those are commonalities between the different species. We do want to know kind of what age we're looking at. And as you look at the different sizes of accipitors, the males are smaller than females in both species, really all three of them, if we include the goshawk in our discussion, such that they don't overlap. But that doesn't mean it's always easy to decide which one you're looking at. But the male Sharpie is the smallest, and it's differently sized in the female. Moving up the scale is smaller than the male Coopers, which is smaller than the female Coopers, which is smaller than the male goshawk, and so on. So these are non-overlapping sizes, but it's kind of interesting in the accipitors, the size differences between males and females are greater than in our other raptors. So especially with the male and female sharpshin, very substantial difference between those two, and the male and female Coopers too. All right, so let's take a look in detail at two of our species here, the sharp-shinned and Cooper's hawk, Sharpie on the left, Coops on the right. And we all know the sharp-shinned is the smaller of the two. And some of them, like this small male on the left, they look like a little pigeon or something like that to me, a little dove kind of a thing. They're absolutely killers and not peaceful like a dove, but they really have an interesting look to them that's unique because of their super smallness. The tail feathers on the sharp-shinned hawk are all a similar length. So this is an important point that we want to look at whenever we have a look at a tail of a hawk. It could be flying, or especially when it's perched. Now, if you're looking at the upper side of the tail, as on the two outer pictures on this slide, what you're looking at there are the central tail feathers. So here's the middle left and right tail feathers on the sharp-shinned hawk on the left there, and kind of just see one of those central feathers is dominant in the view on this Cooper's hawk. So the side viewing from the upper side of the tail is not necessarily the most helpful for this point of the length of the feathers. But let's look at the birds in the middle, and we can see on the sharp-shinned hawk left of center that almost these tail feathers are all essentially the same length. See that? They're all the same length, nothing shorter. But if we transfer over to the Cooper's hawk, we see that the outer tail feathers, those are the ones we see on the facing us right on the closest feathers on the underside of the tail are shorter than the inner central tail feathers. You can see there's one feather tip, there's one a little farther in, here's the innermost tail feather. So we see a substantial difference there. It gives the tail a rounded look, but just notice that they're not the same length. So that's a really important and useful mark whenever you're able to view that part. As we look at the backside of the heads of the bird, or sometimes when they turn their head sideways, you can see that with the sharp-shinned, there's really not a contrast on the head. It's kind of one color, maybe gets a little paler, but not very contrasty, versus the Cooper's has a decidedly pale nape. And so we see a dark cap contrasting with a pale nape, giving it a capped look on the Cooper's hawk. So the sharp-shinned having a smaller head, it looks like it has a bigger eye in proportion, smaller eye in proportion on the Cooper's hawk. Similarly, smaller bill. The sharp-shinned bill sometimes gets likened to like a parakeet. They're both pretty small bills when you get down to it. Sometimes that can be a little hard to judge. Often the Sharpie is a little more heavily marked below. And that shape of the crown, we have no contrast, but it's also nice and smooth versus the Cooper's often has a little bit of an angular head or squarish. And we see these feathers standing up on the back part of the crown or the upper nape, and we call those the hackles. And the Cooper's hawk will often raise those feathers or extend them a little bit, and it creates that kind of angular head profile. And of course, the sharp-shinned has sharper shins, right? What does that actually mean? Well, if you measure the legs, the dimensions are smaller on the sharp-shinned in their depth and smaller overall than the Cooper's hawk. It's not a very useful mark, and if you have to fall back on that, well, gosh, you're not paying attention to all these other things I was talking about. Okay, so maybe if it's going to be sharp-shinned hawk and they change the Cooper's hawk's name, it should be the dull-shinned hawk, something. So let's bring some flying birds into the mix. We won't even worry about the ages, although I think we have 2 adults among these 6 flying birds. But we can look at some of the things we were just talking about. Size, we can't really appreciate in these photos, but you can kind of get the sense of the proportions and the sharp-shinned being a more compact bird. You know, the sharp-shinned is a good deal lighter than the Cooper's hawk, and when it's flying along, if there's a little breeze, it's going to get buffeted by that breeze. You watch it, there'll be little slight movements, even in a fairly light wind, whereas the Cooper's hawk is a heavier wing loading. It's able to be more steady in flight. Notice how the sharp-shinned hawk looks like it has kind of a smallish head, and the wing profile bows forward such that it kind of the head is lost in that little valley of the wrist of the wing. And so it really doesn't project forward from the wing, and the wing is often bowed. Versus on the Cooper's hawk, the wing is straighter, and the head projects out in front of that straighter leading edge of the wing. And we can see the squared tail on the sharp shin versus the more rounded tail on the Cooper's hawk. All right, so we just went through a lot of basic points. Here's 2 beautiful flying birds just to consider before we go to our Let It Fly segment. Look at the tail shape in particular on these birds. Look for those shorter outer tail feathers. Remember, we're looking at the underside of the tail. So the outer tail feathers are going to be the ones that are folded closest to us. And you can see here's the tip of the outermost feather. Here's the tip of the central feather. Quite a difference there versus sharp-shinned hawk. Not much. Another good point is the sharp-shinned is kind of a narrow, pale line. The tips of these tail feathers have white at the tip, but it's rather narrow compared to a broader tip of white on the Cooper's hawk. All right, so one last thing, we got to toss in our goshawk bonus. And here we've got a species that's rare but widespread through a large part of Colorado. You have a chance to see it in a lot of places. A big, bad boss bird. When they show up, sometimes you think you're looking at, is this a boodio hawk? Is this a big falcon? What is this? Especially if they're flying overhead, you might say, this looks kind of part boodio, part falcon, part peregrine, part red-tailed hawk. So they're kind of in between that way. Things that stand out on the goshawk, bold supercilium or eyebrow and dark mask. The adults have a different coloration underneath than the adult of the sharp-shinned or Coopers, being kind of blue-gray underneath instead of reddish. And the immature birds are very heavily marked. They have that eyebrow prominent and very long tail. So sometimes you really know it when the goshawk appears because it looks so different, so big, and so awesome. So here we're going to go to our Let It Fly Accipiter review. So invite Laura and Gigi to join in here. And either one of you, if you want to take a look here at what we have for our first pictures here, begin a little review. What strikes you?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing that I'm seeing is we have two pale eyes on both of these birds. So we're looking at maybe younger birds.
Okay.
Gigi, what's the next thing that you notice?
I agree. And I think just the streakiness is giving me a paler bird appearance. And then my eye immediately goes to that head comparison because I'm really able to see in these photos the just the shape of the head. The one on the left being rounder, the one on the right angular, maybe blocky.
Yeah,
And
the one on the
figure,
left is I think David, I think you called it a little pigeon-like. It's cute almost.
I agree.
so now we can see the tail a little better on these birds.
Yeah, so you were talking about the difference in the tail feather length, David, and I think you
Right.
can kind of see that here, where the one on the left, the feathers all kind of look pretty in line, right? And then the
Right.
one on the right, uh, they kind of look like maybe they've sustained some damage, but they're definitely different lengths, right?
Yeah, the tips are pale, so you have to look for the tip. Like there's one that's got a little bit of fraying going on, and same thing here. It's a little frayed, but they're quite a bit shorter than the others.
And just as with the first set of images, like the head shape is really sticking out to me. Even within like the two images that you added last, the one on the left to me is showing that rounded head appearance, and the one on the right is more angular. And all juvies so far.
Yeah, and we can use the term immature and juvenile with these birds kind of interchangeably.
Mm.
Technically, juvenile is correct, I think, but immature also just to indicate not an adult. They do take about 3 years to reach a full adult plumage, but we don't worry too much about that. So with brown ones, we'll say immature or juvie. Excellent. So here we put up a few more pictures. In fact, we have a couple adults, one of either species highlighted um, on left and right.
So now we're
Yeah.
seeing an adult on the bottom left, number 5, I think.
Right.
But again, the head shapes are continuing to stay consistent, round, and kind of just squatty, petite bird hue on the left. What do you think, Laura?
Yeah, I totally agree. And then on the right there, number 8 looks like more of an adult version of that bird. And you can see on number 8, you can really see there's kind of that capped appearance. It's interesting on number 5, it kind of looks capped from this angle. What do you think about that,
Mhm.
Gigi?
It does, but the overall silhouette is still, I'm not convinced that it's capped.
Yeah,
Yeah, we can't see the back part
Yeah.
of the neck well enough, I think,
right.
to be sure there. Um, cool, excellent. So now we got a little more to work with here. We could just go from one and work across with the different numbers if you like. So
Did we
what do
say
you?
what those last sets were?
So well, it was split like we were looking at in the other, so it's kind of implying, but thank you for making that clear. So we have sharp shins on the left half, Coopers on the right. Excellent, good. And now we've got a little more of a mix-up view here.
Gosh.
Number
I
one.
think
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say I think we have all exhibitors depending on what naming, what species conventions you're
Yeah,
using.
good to figure that part out. Good.
Yeah.
I agree. And I'm like looking at the full set, and number 5 is helpful to me because of that just squatty appearance, round head. I want to say number 5 is sharp shin, and I want to rule it out quickly because number 1 is throwing me a little, to be honest.
Mm.
Okay, so you're looking at the head size and kind of squat position as good for sharpshin there. Can you see anything else on that bird?
Yeah, the tail really stands out to me as just kind of a square tail with that narrow white along the edge. And David, you might want to say more about this, but I've noticed both birds have white on the edge. So That's not a field marker I personally use. Do you have anything to share about
So
that?
you're talking about the tip of the
Yeah,
rectushes or tail feathers is
yeah.
white in both species. And a reality is you need to consider whether the feather is sort of fresh or if it's really worn. If it's really worn, you're going to see less white, sometimes even hardly any on a particular feather. If it's very fresh, you have the maximum amount of white. So you kind of consider that. But generally speaking, the Cooper's has a broader terminal band of white on each feather by a number of millimeters versus the sharp shin's more narrow band. So they both have white, but Cooper's is more prominent. Um, and so we say sharp shin on the right-hand bird. So what else can we do with these pictures?
Yeah. So I think number 4 just kind of is a really nice comparison of a similar kind of pose. And number 4 I would pin as a Cooper's hawk, just based again on the tail shape. We can see that there's different feather lengths, and then the head is it's less dainty, right? It's a much blockier head.
Bigger, and then the eye proportion is different too. I think you see the eye
Yeah.
looks a little smaller relatively on the Coopers. And even though the backside of the tail is not the best view for assessing tail feather length, if the birds kind of spread the tail just a little bit, you can, like you noticed, you can see the tips of those outer feathers happening and confirming absolutely a Cooper's hawk there. So that's a really good mark. Great. So we've got a Sharpie number 5, Cooper's number 4.
Number
And
3.
we're going
What?
backwards.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
we're going
are because
backwards.
I'm staying away from number 1 for now. Number 3, one of the things that stands out to me is how it's holding its wing, but in this specific angle, I can't tell that much. I kind of wish I had a different view. So the next thing I'm relying on is that tail, and it looks really squared, and I can't tell yet if it's the angle or not. To me, the wings look pressed forward a little, and then in combo with the squared tail, I want to say sharp shinned, and the fact that the head's not protruding. Would like to hear other thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Hmm.
Yeah, and even though it's sideways on the tail, you can see these feathers are the same length because otherwise these white tips would be further up on the outer feathers. And I think the wing shape is the one we look for on a Sharpie, that kind of bowed forward
Hmm.
shape. So excellent. Sharpshin talk number 3. So we should go to number 2 then, since we're going backwards.
Yeah, so number 2, again, looking at that, we're looking at an immature bird with that yellow eye and the streakiness, or juvenile, and that head to me says Cooper's hawk. It's that bigger, blockier head.
Agreed.
It's maybe a
And
female. She looks lanky.
and I know we probably don't want to overly rely on, but this bird doesn't look cute. This bird looks like he's out to kill. He looks a little intimidating. Just kind
Yeah,
of a like more fierce look than
that's
cute.
that's what the flicker thought too.
Oh no.
All right, so number 1
Okay,
is
number
usually
1.
or Laura, one of you guys, come on, what do you think? So
I'm
Number
not
1.
I'm not scared anymore. I feel better.
You feel better? You want to take a stab at it?
The head is round, and that was helpful. I feel like what threw me at first was the coloring, and it could from far away almost look like a hooded like appearance, but the squared off tail and the round head are helping me feel more confident that it's a sharpshin. Um, yay!
Yay!
all right, so good job.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Good team.
All right, beautiful birds.
Yeah, they are.
All right, so we're gonna switch over to our woodpeckers tonight, Downy and Harry, and one of the first things I want to point out when thinking about these is that here in Colorado, we're especially if you live sort of in the middle of the state, you're dealing with 2 different forms of each species. If you look in eBird and in your field guides, uh, on your eBird checklist, you'll see, for example, downy woodpecker, prairie, or eastern. It probably says I put prairie in there. Oh, it should be eastern, but eastern prairie, same thing, right? And then the other is the Rocky Mountain form. And so the difference is that the prairie or eastern form has spotted wing coverts. So what the heck are the wing coverts? These are the wing coverts showing on these downy woodpeckers on the left. So we got downies on the left, Harry's on the right on this slide. We have the flight feathers are barred black and white, but the wing coverts are spotted black and white as well. So here's secondaries and primaries on this open wing, and then the wing coverts are covering over those flight feathers. That's what coverts do, and they have spots. versus here they are in the closed wing. I call this area kind of the wing panel. Here you can see the barring on those flight feathers. Here's these are primaries. Here's these barring right here's the same thing. But on the closed wing, the wing coverts are here. Compare that with this hairy woodpecker right across the way, which shows a dark wing panel without spots. This is a Rocky Mountain form. Here's a great extreme variety of that up in the upper right. So spotted equals prairie or eastern, non-spotted or very few spots equals Rocky Mountain form, but they don't distribute only according to those geographic areas, and there's a lot of overlap. So you want to be thinking about that. One thing that's a good little trick here in the metro area, if you see a hairy woodpecker, if you see one of these woodpeckers with a dark wing panel, that's a hairy woodpecker because it's the Rocky Mountain form that's down in the metro area. I'm not sure if that's true heading up the Boulder and Larimer counties, down in the lowlands close to the mountains like it is in the metro area. But here in Middleton, Denver, places like that, we see a dark paneled woodpecker. It's a hairy woodpecker, and that's what it is. The downies all have spots until you get well up into the mountains. All right, so the downy is, of course, just a smaller version of the hairy, really, and the bill is shorter, stubbier versus a hairy's longer, more chisel-like bill. You can think of maybe a chisel versus an awl. I don't know. The downy often looks like it has a soft little area over the base of the bill. I don't have that in my notes here, but the scientific name, Latin name is pubescens, and I think of that as being soft, and that's why I kind of make an association there, kind of soft little place there. One thing that's an excellent mark that is quite different on nearly all individuals is that the downies have these black bars on their tail feathers, and sometimes they're kind of a pronounced bar. Other times it looks like black spots, so a little individual variation. But when you're looking at the underside of the tail, you can see those bars. And when you're looking at the upper side of the tail, let's look at this flying bird up above here. You can see those bars there on the spread tail. And not so much on these other particular pictures. We'll keep an eye out for that. So you can't always see it, but it's a great mark when you're able to notice it. We compare with the hairy, bigger bill, and it pretty much never, I'm going to say quote unquote, it's pretty rare for it to have any dark bars there. You can also apply the suet cage test. The downy woodpecker is equal to the side of a standard suet block, and the hairy woodpecker is longer than the size of a standard suet block, and so its tail has to fold under the suet cage. So different positioning when you see those two. The hairy is a good bit bigger. All right, so here we got our Let It Fly woodpecker mashup. Invite Laura and Gigi come back in, and we can just kind of go through. You can go backwards, forwards, or you can decide where you want to start.
I love the flexibility.
We'll start with number one this time.
Yeah.
I love the suet block trick. I've never heard that one before, but that bird looks like it fits on the suet block. So just from that, I want to call it a downy. What do you think, Gigi?
Yeah, I'm new to the suet cage test, but I wrote that down. Don't want to forget it. These spots on the wings, based on what you just shared, is also supportive of downy as well as the just petite bill.
Oh.
Now the hairy could have spots as well, right? So they're either one. That's not like an ID point, but it is I'll say a subspecies difference, and it is useful for ID. Like I was saying in the metro area, if you see an unspotted wing panel, that's going to be a hairy, even if you're uncertain on the size. And sometimes, even though the downy is pretty little and the hairy is pretty big, sometimes it's hard to decide what you have, right?
Mhm.
I
Sure.
find it challenging. Cool. So
Yeah.
we got a downy for number one.
Yeah, so number two, the thing that stands out to me is that big bill.
Yeah.
I agree. That one feels good for a hairy. I can't really tell what it's perched on. But yeah, just the bill to me is, we didn't talk about this, David, but something that helps me with these two is like the length of the bill relative to the head.
Good.
And looking at it, it looks like the length of the bill is about the width of the head versus the downy is about half. That has always helped me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's a good way. That's easy to compare it to directly.
Yeah, another someone once told me that this it doesn't really make sense, but it makes sense in my head and it helps me for some reason. Is that a downy woodpecker you could put it in your pocket, and a hairy woodpecker you would not want to put in your pocket. And I think when you're thinking about the bill size, that really like drives it home. Like, would I put that bill in my pocket?
Oh, what a funny comparison, but it
Yeah, I
works. I
love
like that. Yeah, that's neat.
it.
That's one of the ones, Laura, where I think like you're not going to find that in the field guides, but
No, yeah.
The pocket
So
test.
moving on to number three, I would put that bird in my pocket. I think that's a downy with that short bill, and it's got lots of spots on its back, which we said isn't a diagnostic per se, but I think that's a cute little downy.
yeah, and I want to use my new vocabulary word. On this image, you can see the pubescence, that like a soft, fuzzy white, almost like little mustachy type thing at the
Yeah,
base of the bill.
it makes it look more gentle to my eye.
Yeah.
Fits in with its small size.
And may I ask a
Okay.
follow-up question? Does the hairy like officially never have that, or do they have just a more like less pronounced version of it?
Well, you can see it's white in the same way on the hairy well, we identified one hairy number two is white
Mm,
there, but it doesn't look as fluffy and soft.
yeah.
Often it's just more laid down, or I don't know, just kind of textually, or what to say, texture wise, it's a little bit different to my eye.
I agree. It's like fluffy on the downy.
Yeah.
Cool. Number four, the bill is very helpful here because it's almost like undeniably huge compared to the downy. So that feature would very much help me identify this as a hairy.
Cool.
Yeah, and then similarly with number five, that bill is small and like Gigi mentioned with the length of the bill versus the width of the head, that bill is really not very long compared to the width of the head, so that's a downy there.
Yeah, and these are all males. We didn't mention males, of course, have the red spot on the back part of the crown, and the females don't. But notice the one on the right is kind of yellow. It's just an aberrant individual. It's kind of yellowish. Sometimes you see something a little bit off. And I was kind of sad to see that none of the pictures I chose here are showing little spots on the tail feathers. And I want to just pop right back to this image and just highlight that because that is a really good mark to look for when you can see the underside of the tail, and sometimes you can see it on the upper side of the tail as well. So good identifying feature there. So good job. I think you got those all correct. And we'll just put in this fun picture of the two species together side by side across the sides of the trunk there, hairy on the right, downy on the left. You can actually see those barred feathers right there on that downy. This was down in Lamar. Kind of fun to see them both together.
I agree. I feel like until I've seen that in the field myself or even in photographs, you can't really appreciate the size difference. And I think it's awesome to compare the two.
Yeah, that's why they remain a good ID challenge for us. Looks like I don't have do I not have a key to that? So we'll just go back to Downy number one, then Harry two, Downy three, and then a Harry number four underneath the picture now, and the Downy number five. So cool. So we'll head into a little finch face off. And don't you think this is a beautiful slide? I just love these colors of these finches. We've got the very familiar house finch on the left, and the for a lot of us somewhat less familiar Cassin's finch on the right. Though we might live in a place where Cassin's is a regular customer, or at least during certain times of some years they're regular around. We generally think of them as a little more exceptional, and I like the term of the mountain finch par excellence for the Cassin's finch. They are one of my very favorite finches. But before we think about the Cassins anymore, let's look at the house. We're very familiar with the house. It's the smaller of these finches. It's a little slimmer bodied. The bill shape is important for these finches. The house has a rounded bill. And notice how plain the face looks on these house finches. We've got four different males with different colors, but they all have that same plain face with kind of a brown mask going through the middle, but not really any pronounced pattern on the face, just a little bit of a different color across the central part of the face, like a brown mask. Notice the underparts on these birds is not really white. The base color is a little bit off-white, maybe a tannish, a little dingy, not quite a bright, clean white. And there's extensive streaking on these male house finches, and generally it looks a little bit blurred and not particularly sharp on that streaking. So when you look at the color of the male house finches, we're all familiar with the variety that we can see ranging from a definite red tone to orange, pretty common, to pretty drab yellow tone birds. We generally don't see a pink color in a house finch though. Red, orange, yellow, not pink. Their backs are very drab and brown colored. So we can compare that with our Cassins now, which is a bigger finch. Notice it has a pointed bill. The upper mandible is straightish, so it makes a kind of a longer pointed bill, kind of a big bill on the Cassins. And it has a pattern to its face. We'll see that especially with the female, but even in the male, notice there's stripes on the head of the male Cassin's finch. Supercilium, malar stripe there. And it often looks a little bit crusty. So as where the house finch had a round crown, the Cassin's finch often looks has some feathers erected there so that it's kind of got like a little pink cap that's standing up. You see that? Those feathers are standing up, so it gives that little capped look that we don't really see in a house finch. I didn't call that out in my text here, but kind of crested cap look on the Cassin's finch. The underparts are whiter usually than on the house finch, and whatever streaks there are, they tend to be sparser, but they're going to be a little bit crisper on the Cassin's finch. The male is definitely, this is what I love so much about the Cassin's finch, is the male is pink. The color is definitely different from the house finch, that kind of pink red, and usually the darkest color on the Cassin's finch is up there on that pink cap, that pinky red cap. And we can look and see there are indeed some streaks extending down onto the undertail coverts. You can see on this top left Cassin's a little bit there, a little on the undertail coverts here. It's an important mark in comparison to another finch. So, of course, the females look different. They're not colorful, but one thing that's important to know is that the immature males now look like females. So when we say females, or when we're looking at females, we got to realize that some of those are young male birds that won't appear different for a while yet. So we're just going to call them females here for our discussion tonight. And we can see, again, we've got house left, Cassin's right, and we can apply a lot of the same things with shape, the base color of the breast, the shape of the crown, the plainness of the face. And let's notice especially that the face pattern on the Cassin's finch, again, it has features. It's got stuff going on there. In fact, here's calling out some of these different things: a pale area over the bill, white or whitish eye crescents, pale supercilium coming back from the eye, a pale malar line coming down from the bill below the eye, create a face pattern on the Cassin's finch, whereas the house finch just looks plain-faced for the most part. This one on the upper left is about as patterned as you get for a female house finch. Picture on the lower right, bringing in an evening grosbeak is kind of fun, but you can see the pink on the back of the male here. Notice the crisp streaking on the backs of these Cassin's finches versus the unstreaked or bland looking backs on the house finches. So usually when you actually have a Cassin's finch, you know it. So if you're not sure, it's because you don't have one. So let's throw in the bonus finch, the purple finch. Beautiful bird, definitely rare in Colorado, turns up in a number of different seasons during migration and then during the winter time. Really a treat. There are usually a small handful of records each winter. And so we've got house on the left, Cassin's on the right for reminder, and purple down the middle. And this is a pot-bellied sort of a finch, kind of large-headed proportionally. They have a decidedly forked tail, which you can see well in these bottom pictures. Their bill is kind of straightish, more like the Cassin's finch than the more rounded house finch, but a little bit intermediate actually. They have a boldly patterned face, and the male has kind of a red to pink coloration. And to me, they really look like they've been dipped in and stained with red wine. So purple finch, a little different look than the Cassins. They have a flatter, more rounded head without that capped look, without the kind of cresty look of those raised crown feathers. And their undertail coverts tend to be unmarked. As you can see in these images, both the female type unmarked undertail coverts and no streaks on this male's undertail coverts. Colorado, I think mostly gets the eastern purple finch. There may be some occurrences of western purple finch, but I think that one is in the minority if it does occur. So there's our purple finch bonus. So we'll let it fly with a little finchy review here.
Before we let it fly, I have a quick clarifying question. I know you spoke
Okay.
about a plain back versus streaky back on house finch versus Cassin's finch. Um, can you say more about purple finch? I don't think any of the pictures highlight it. It might be unremarkable, but I'm just curious if there's anything to talk about there.
Very good question. They're not as pinked back. I believe they're more brown backed, and they are they're more patterned than the house finch. Yeah, but I don't think as crisp or as dramatically so as the Cassins, which has I think more paleness in the streak. You know, pale contrasting with the darker streaks.
Cool, thank you.
So, how about that pretty bird on the left?
Yeah, that's a pretty bird.
It is pretty.
Yeah, I am always trying to turn my feeder house finches into any other type of finch. So, my first instinct is that bird looks kind of pink. But then looking at the head, there's no real facial pattern jumping out at me, and it's a pretty rounded head. And then that bill shape's pretty round too. What do you think, Gigi?
I agree. I think it's a very, very pretty male house finch. I too, Laura, try to turn them into other things. And what I've learned after lots of review of my own photos and notes is like there can be very beautiful male finches that are vibrant colors that stand out, and they're still house finches. So yeah, I think the round head, round bill, and I don't know if we talked about this, David, but like almost like a brown on the cheek area kind of stood
Yeah.
out to me.
I did mention that they have a brown
Yeah.
mask, so they don't
Yeah.
really have a pattern of stripes or anything, but there's kind of a color difference.
He's a stunner though. He's beautiful.
Yeah, he's a nice one.
Number two, the crest stands out to me. The forked
For
tail,
sure.
the forked tail is throwing me. I don't know if you would throw us a purple finch right away, but the streaked back stands out to me, and because that's something we talked about, and in conjunction with the straight bill Cassin's finch. I think if it was a rounder bill, forked tail, I might have more questions.
Right.
But I feel
And I think you mentioned look at that nice cap, kind of crusty peaked head.
Yeah.
Is
Oh,
good
yeah.
for both the Cassins and the purple have the fork tail compared to the house, which is kind of square tailed or round tailed, not forked. So
I left this one for Laura.
Oh,
which one?
number
Which one?
three?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so number three, gosh. So we're looking at a non-adult male, I think. So either a female or a young male. I see some facial patterning. So I'm seeing kind of like the supercilium and the malar are kind of white, but it doesn't really like jump out to me super boldly. Um, the bill is a little hard to see, the bill angle because of it's busy chomping some of that good seed, but it looks pretty straight and not curved. And so that kind of facial patterning and the straight bill and the streaky back on there, I'm leaning towards Cassin's finch because a purple finch, I would want to see an even bolder facial patterning.
Cool.
I agree. Especially something to consider is number four, just how plain that
Yeah.
face is compared to on number three, just those bold patterns jump off. And then like the crisp streaks also stand out to me that support Cassins. And I kind of zoomed in on the bill and it looks very straight when you zoom in.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Number three at Cassins,
Yeah.
female or young male, and number four then is a house. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
And the base color, kind of the not the streaks, but the pale base color of the underparts is that kind of off white, and it's a little whiter on the Cassins is something that you can also pick out. And you know, it's hard to find a picture of a Caston's finch that's not munching a seed. That's what I learned in preparing this bird bombs. So that's kind of fun. So cool. So what do we
Yeah.
have on the lower tier?
Okay, so number 5. So we've got 3 birds. That one, the reddish one on the left, doesn't have the cresty cap, right? And huge, I don't see super distinctive facial patterning on that one, and the bill is pretty rounded, so I'm going to call that one a house finch, the reddish one, and number 5 on the left.
Okay.
And Gigi?
Yeah, I'm chewing on it because I know that bill just looks really big. So, but I remember that purple finch has a straighter bill, so I think round is going to help us rule in house finch. So I will buy that. I agree.
Okay, so we have 2 others.
I know. The fella all the way on the right, that plain face, darker streaks, roundish bill from what I can tell, and no bold patterning is house finch, either immature male or female.
I
So
agree.
2 house finches, male and female type.
Yeah, and then our standout there in the middle has a really bold facial pattern, and I can't quite tell on the bill whether it's straight or curved. I'm not seeing, it's got that white undertone versus the tan undertone, the super strong facial patterning.
So we know
It's
it's not a
also
house
really
finch.
dark. So I'm kind of inclined to guess this might be a purple finch.
Yeah, so how can you compare it to the Cassins? You notice the darkness, which I think is pretty good. Plus, you can see the head shape, even though the feeder makes it a little obscure there. But you can see it doesn't look cresty or pointed, but it's
Yeah,
kind of
that's a good
flat and
point.
round. And there was a question earlier about the back on the purple finch, and here we can see it is indeed streaked in a fashion somewhat similar to the Cassin's finch. But that is the purple, and they are more strongly marked, often appearing more contrasty and a little different shape. You can see the house finches here a little smaller body, a little slimmer
Mhm.
shape than the purple being kind of chunky. So that's cool. How about number 6?
And I just want to say something real quick about number 5. It
Yeah.
illustrates the point that you shared at the very beginning of our presentation today, that it's really good to know the common everyday birds, because if that was our feeder, that should give us pause. That very streaky, more contrasted finch should raise questions for us. And knowing the other 2 species well helps us rule this in as something
Totally.
a bit more rare.
And one day it will be there out your window, you watch.
Ah, number
So,
6, the word
Number 6,
drab.
yeah.
The word drab comes to mind. So that in conjunction with the snow tells me we are not in our breeding plumage. But the one on the left I can tell is a male because there's a light wash of color.
Yeah. And it does have kind of that bolder face patterning with the supercilium and the malar both being kind of pinkish. And it's got a lot of patterning going on its back. The bill looks pretty straight to me. So for that bird in the front, I'm leaning towards Cassins. What do you think
okay.
about the one in the back?
The plain back is helping me rule out Cassins because I would expect the streaky back. And
Yeah.
the angle, and it's blurry, but I do see the bill curving downward, which would help me narrow that to house finch based on what I could see.
Cool. We worked through all those correctly. Excellent. Good to keep an eye on those birds in our yard. So we'll shift over to some sparrow wars here, and we're going to compare our 2 common sparrows here, the white-crowned sparrow and the tree sparrow. And one of the uh, things we don't need to worry about really are the adult white-crowned sparrows in this comparison, because with that black and white striped head, given any kind of a reasonable view, you know what you have. So we won't worry about beautiful adults here. I love Corinne's nice photo from South Platte Park. But we'll worry about the immature white-crowned sparrows that were hatched out this past nesting season. And we can note that the ones that we get over a lot of Colorado during the wintertime are the Gambel's white-crowned sparrow. The mountain form, probably not at all, but the dark lord eastern form maybe, or something, some of the dark lord forms are possible. But principally what we're getting are the Gambel's white-crowned sparrows, which have pale lores. And so the lore is that area between the eye and the bill. And you can see it is grayish or pale colored, not dark on these young Gambel's white-crowned sparrows. So we'll worry about the immature white crowns comparing to the tree sparrow. And the adult and immature tree sparrows during the winter both look pretty similar. So unlike the white crowns where you have the white and black stripe, adult white crowns very dramatically different. So the white crown is a bigger sparrow. It has a basically one color bill. There is a dark area often along the top of the upper mandible, along the culmen, but largely the bill is one color. It has an eye line that goes back from behind the eye and is straight. It may flare a little bit, but it's essentially a straight line. Notice it's not in front of the eye. The breast is unmarked gray, clear gray breast. The upper parts are they're brown, kind of a drab brown, not a lot of outstanding highlights on the upper parts of the young white-crowned sparrow or the adult. The tail is largely brown without any white along the outer edges. All right, so we'll contrast with the smaller tree sparrow. They have a bicolored bill. The upper mandible is dark and the lower mandible is mostly pale. So you get two colors on the bill. And notice that the eye line consistently it goes back from the eye like on the white crown, but it has this little squiggle, almost like a seismograph thing or almost like a skeleton key. So a little squiggle on the eye line and shaped like a little skeleton key there. Do you see that? It's a distinctive little shape that is different from what you see on the more straight, maybe flaring, but non-squiggly line on the white crowned sparrow. There is a pattern on the underparts of the tree sparrow. It has a diffuse dusky breast spot in the middle, and then it has some chestnut coloring along the sides of the breast, different from the white crown. The upper parts are bright, brighter brown, brighter white. And the tail has a little bit of white in it. You can see, especially in this lower left of the tree sparrow pictures, little white in the outer part of the tail. And they often will habitually flick their tail, fan their tail, spread their tail really quick, and you get these little flashes of white. The white-crowned sparrow, you don't get those flashes of white, and it doesn't twitch the tail in the same way as the tree sparrow does. So a little quick comparison there. We can now bring in our bonus bird here, the chipping sparrow, which is indeed a rarity in Colorado during the winter. So common in migration, common breeding season bird. But this time of year, hardly any records extending much into December in Colorado, very, very few into winter proper. Chipping sparrow is small like the tree sparrow. It has a single colored bill. It has an eye line that goes through the eye to the lores. Okay, so that's different from the other two we're looking at. And it has these whitish eye arcs that are prominent. So the dark eye line going to the lores divides an eye ring into two eye arcs on the chipping sparrow. Its breast is clear, unlike the tree sparrow with the central spot and the chestnut on the sides. The chipping sparrow has a clear breast. No squiggle on its eye line, in the same fashion as that skeleton key on the tree sparrow. So now we got our Let It Fly sparrow review. Another 6 images here, and I bet you can rapid fire work out a lot of these guys.
Yeah, you're keeping me and Gigi busy this time around. So let's see. To start off with number one, we've got a bill that's all one color. We've got a really clean breast. The clean breast rules out tree sparrow. So does it not having a bicolor bill also rules out tree sparrow. I'm gonna call that one a white-crowned sparrow.
And I think this blackish thing here might be a shadow or
A
some
shadow or
artifact.
something. Yeah.
But we can see that, yeah, good.
And the other thing that helps me rule out the chipping is, well, first of all, it's rare, so I wouldn't assume it unless I had more distinguishing marks, but the fact that the eye line doesn't go to the front of the eye to the lower helps us confirm white crown sparrow.
Great.
Oh, this guy. I see lightness on the edge of the tail feather, but I can't quite tell. The bill is helping me though, because it does look bicolor. It looks like the upper mandible is darker than the lower.
We're on number 2.
Oh, yes, sorry. I went right in.
Uh-huh.
And you know what, David? I'd never heard about the skeleton key, but I now that you said it, I fully see it, and I'm excited to look for that field mark out in the field because
Yeah.
it's really helpful. It's right there.
Yeah, it's a particular shape. Cool.
Anything
So
to
Yeah.
add,
So
Laura?
I agree that that's a tree sparrow.
yeah, and I think you're right. There is some white there, although it's in this particular photo, it's hard to be certain with the lighting.
Mhm.
But cool.
Yeah.
So we got tree sparrow number 2. How about number 3? We got
Okay,
two
number 3, we've
sparrows
got
there.
2 birds. And kind of going off of our similar features, the bills look like they're not bicolor, they're one color. We've got the eye line. I don't see a key, although they're kind of turned at an angle. And it doesn't go through the eye again, so I'm not thinking chipping. I think those are both white crowned sparrows again.
I fully agree. And on the American tree sparrow, we would expect to see the darker center spot. So the clear
Yeah,
breast
for
is
sure.
another confirming feature. Well, number 4 is funny, David.
It's
Ooh,
backwards. Can you turn it around?
We
there's a new marker that you taught. Like, I didn't know about the lightness on the edge of the tail, but like, given that I'm like forced to rely on something other than the eye line and the head, the white on that outer edge is helping me
yeah,
decide that that's an American tree sparrow.
and they are really pretty little sparrows because they have these nice bright
Yeah.
markings above, a brighter brown and this more extensive white here. And you can compare that to another sparrow down here, and you can kind of see the difference. I don't want to give away what that is, but I think you got it right. True sparrow facing away. Love that little white in the tail. Plus, they'd be twitching the tail. They'd be quickly spreading those tail feathers really quick, and just get these little flashes of action there. It's hard to even see what they're doing. It's so quick. Towhees do the same thing. Um, So, okay, so tree sparrow number 4, we'll continue number 5, or you can go to 6, whatever you want to
You threw
Oh,
a finch in, I see.
yeah.
do.
Just
Good.
for fun. A
And
house
maybe
finch.
something else. Eh?
House
Okay,
finch.
house
Yeah, it's
finch
got
down
that
Even
there.
round head.
even though it's blurry, the round
Yeah,
bill.
Yeah, round
and
bill,
even that
round head.
brownish mask right there.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so house finch to the right
Um,
of number 5.
and then the sparrow that we're looking at, it's got again that sort of brightly patterned back. It's got, I think I see a skeleton key, and I think I see a bicolor bill, so I'm gonna call that a tree sparrow.
Cool. And what about this one on the left of that same picture?
Oh gosh.
Crow?
Well, it's pretty little. I think what else would be down at sea? It's a redwing. We won't worry too much.
Oh.
That's a redwing. But keep crow in mind because we're coming up. How about number 6?
Number 6, I see the back, comparing to number 4, the back isn't as strikingly patterned. Um, it looks kind of chunky to me as a sparrow. I'm inclined to call that a white crowned sparrow. What do you think, Gigi?
I am too, because we didn't discuss this. The chipping sparrow, I believe, would have rufous along the top of the crown. Is that
Yeah.
true or false, David?
Its crown at this season would be kind of mottled brown, black, warm brown and black, but not clear, like kind of clear colored like that.
Yeah. This one's
Um,
a fun little trick question though, because I feel like a lot of the markers we talked about aren't present, but yeah, we can definitely compare to the feathers of the back.
exactly. And also you can see no pale
Mm-hmm.
evidence on what we can
Mhm.
see of the tail. So cool. So we got those guys worked out. And then we'll zoom here into our last comparison and maybe my favorite for the night. And viva la différence. And so the crow versus the raven. This is a constant ID comparison that we have to deal with in Colorado in most of the state. And for experienced birders, a lot of times you got it down, you know what it is pretty much off the bat. But you know, if you're honest, as I know, that there are individuals you got to do at least a double take or what is going on? Is that the crow or is that the raven? Not quite sure, but there are easy ways to tell and some identifying features. The crow, of course, has boring, monotonous calls that are basically all the same. We see crows in flocks, like hordes going over the landscape. Crows pester raptors. They consort with gulls. All right, so a crow is a parking lot picker, and they can't soar. Their wings aren't quite big enough, broad enough to really soar like, say, like a red-tailed hawk can soar. They're unbearded. That's one thing about crows. They're smaller, and if you get down to it, even though they are brilliant, they're less brilliant. So the raven, though, in contrast, it has fascinating and varied vocalization. You often see them in pairs, which is endearing, and they're often talking to each other and saying really smart things. They're on a par with raptors. Okay, so they don't pester raptors, but they challenge raptors. They're right there with them, and they can soar with eagles. Crows, no parking lot picking, but dumpster diving is the way to go. And their wings are such that they can soar like an eagle, literally. They're bearded, even the ladies, they're bigger, and they're, if we get down to it, they're more brilliant. But if you want to get down to the real brass tack question between crow and raven ID, something that will really get you there all the time, you really need to ask these two questions. Is it beautiful? Is it doing something interesting? So if the answer to either of those questions, and you are true to your heart, is yes, then it is a raven. All right. So it doesn't really take any other field marks to worry about. Those are the two questions you can go to. I'm working on a contract with David Sibley to get this worked into the next edition of his field guide. It's an excellent way to go. Is it beautiful? Is it doing something interesting? Yes, you've got a raven there. So let's go to our Let It Fly Corvid review. We brought out the most important ID features, but there may be some particular field marks or things we can look at. And so I'll ask you to, what differences do you notice between crows and ravens?
Well, David, I feel like maybe you've got a little bit of a bias here on whether
Oh,
you like crows or ravens better.
I
there is objective
agree.
truth. I don't know.
I feel like if anyone's ever been on a trip with you, David, you've definitely asked those two questions. And all that comes to mind is what crow hurt you?
Oh,
I'm
well,
the disdain. The tail shape is definitely standing to answer your question. The
yeah.
tail shape is standing out to me, specifically comparing image 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And I guess if I'm using the unofficial guidance, is it beautiful? The one on the number 2 is absolutely beautiful. Like that, just the shape of the feathers and the tail relative to the body. It is beautiful silhouette.
Okay, so we have longer central tail feathers
Mm.
on the raven, and the crow has tail feathers that are more similar in length. So when it's kind of closed like this, it looks sort of squared. If it fans it or opens it, it looks almost fan shaped. But you don't see kind of what's called a wedge type shape with these longer middle tail feathers on the raven. Any other differences you can notice?
The primaries are different. In that image 2, they're splayed out a bit more.
So a lot more like a hawk, maybe.
Yeah.
You can see the fingers is what
Mm.
we can say, more of a fingered kind of effect there. So there, and indeed the when you see a red tail maybe and a raven soaring around together, you see the raven's wings are not too differently shaped from the red tail wing, and they do have the more fingered look on their primaries. That's good. Wings are
The
broader.
bill on the raven is also bigger.
Yeah. So we could maybe compare 4 and 5 here. We can see the bill size,
Yeah.
uh, and just the heft of the bill, the depth of the bill being greater on the raven. That kind of curve shape there is distinctive versus a little more straight edged on the crow.
And there's something I'm realizing about image 1 and 2, just to go back, is that the raven tail is longer, more pronounced, compared to the crow.
Okay.
Although I feel like it stands out to me comparing the two images. Sometimes in the field, that doesn't jump off for me personally.
Right. Right.
I'm looking for the mustache on 5, and I don't see it very well.
The mustache. So do you mean the rectal bristles?
Yes, the erectile
That's
bristles.
them right there. It's not a lot of contrast in this particular picture, but they're extending out about this far.
Oh, thank you. Yes, for
Right
pointing
there,
that
and
out. I
it's
was
just
expecting it to be darker.
yeah, it's kind of shiny there on this one. So I did put up a little summary of some of these points we're talking about. Um, and even as we see them flying, the wing beats or something, I'd say that the crow has kind of a choppy wing beat. The raven has a smoother wing beat. I even draw the analogy of the raven kind of looking like a Harley Davidson as it goes along versus like a Honda dirt bike or street bike for the crow.
Oh my
Much more
gosh.
compact, not as elegant looking. Yes, I'm biased, but so we have this is the way it is, and it's for a good reason. And I'm sorry, that's how it is. So we have crow number 1, 3, and 4 here, and ravens are 2 and 5 and 6. But really a good challenge. Here's one of my very favorite cartoons. We'll be wrapping up with this. I'll give you all a chance to kind of read it a bit, and you can check it out on the video afterwards. This is the cartoon Farley by Phil Frank. We are ravens. All right, so I'll let it go at that. And thank you, Gigi and Laura, for being on the hot seat there and sharing your observations. And we can say thank you very much to our photographers who have made images available for this bird bombs. It would not be possible without your great images that we can all learn from and enjoy. Hope everybody has good luck on the Christmas bird count. If you've never done it, make this be the year when you give it a try. There's lots of counts to choose from. So we're get ready all ready for our next bird bombs. And I'm calling this one Raptors for Real. And what I want to do is work with some photos that aren't quite as beautiful as some of the wonderful contributions we have from our many contributors, but pick out some that are more like what we encounter in the field. I take a lot of good pictures that way. These 4 raptor pictures were all my own, as you can see, my photographic skills. So Raptors for Real coming up January 23rd. You can register now on the Denver Field Ornithologist page under programs and events. So I'm going to stop the screen share. And if there's any questions or comments, one of you two, Laura, you can help out with that.
Sure, yeah. So someone says that they love the new technical terms that we came up with on this bird bombs, pocket-sized downy, cute versus fierce hawks. I think we had a few others.
Good. Yes, we try.
So the sort of non-technical technical terms, I think, go a long ways in helping people remember the sort of field marks. So
Absolutely.
yeah. David, I'm curious, are you doing any CBCs this year?
I am right now. I'm signed up only for one that it's the Denver CBC, which is this Saturday, and it's like Southwest Denver metro area, and I live right in the middle of it, so I'll be doing the section that I live in, and
Nice.
hopefully some of the snow we had will melt away more in the next couple days.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you going to do one?
I'm doing that one as well. I
Oh,
have
that's right.
a steep and icy hike
Oh, great.
every
I
year.
don't
So
envy that part.
yeah, yeah. Gigi, how about you?
Yeah, I'll be joining on the Southwest Denver.
Nice.
Excellent.
I'm not able to do the one I led one last year, and it's a neat opportunity. Someone is still leading it, but it's in Central Denver on Jan 1st, so New Year's Day is a fun treat. And the people doing the count get exclusive access to the Denver Botanic Gardens, which is really neat, and the ever exclusive Denver Country Club. So if you ever wanted to go to the country
Wow.
club, you can sign up for that one on the Denver Audubon website. It's really neat just to be able to traipse around where no one is we're not usually allowed in there.
That's one of the cool things about the Christmas count is sometimes you get special access, or you can certainly get to visit new areas that you haven't been to that might be in your count section, along with your leader who knows what they're doing, what's where and all that. So it's a cool opportunity.
Sure, sure. Let's see. Linda Purcell asks, a chipping sparrow might be a single individual or a couple maybe mixed in a flock. What kind of should we be keeping an eye out for? Is it going to be one or two by themselves or mixed
A
up
very,
or?
very good question, and you never can say for sure, but for the chipping sparrow, principally, it'd be a single bird, and they really are quite rare. The purple finches, though, a lot of times the records involve sometimes small little groups of 2 or 3 or 4 individuals for the purple finch. So sometimes it's a little different among different species. Finches are very flock oriented, even more so than sparrows. But if you did have a chipper show up in the wintertime, you're probably going to have just the lone bird.
Cool. Well, I don't see any more audience questions. Gigi, do you have any more questions for David?
Yes, I raised my hand, but I figured you probably didn't see it.
Oh,
It was
no,
actually
sorry, I
pretty
missed it.
similar. It was pretty similar to Linda's question. I'm anything notable about habitat for Cassins versus purple, knowing that purple would be a very sort of lucky and unusual, but not impossible find. Um, Anything to help as far as habitat for either of those.
They're going to be at feeders. So that's, I mean, Cassins, when you're in obviously they occur away from feeders, and up in the forest in particular, you can find them away from feeding stations, but they really like feeders. But the great majority of purple finch encounters, particularly in the winter, I think, are going to be birds that are turning up either at feeders or there's feeders nearby, even though you may not know it. So that's a commonality. The Cassins is more of a conifer-oriented bird than the purple is, but they go where the feeders go. And if you know, sometimes you get Cassins down in town away from the actual forest areas, and they're queuing into the food source at the feeder. So um, I'd say it's purples can show up almost anywhere.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all of our,
right,
our
cool.
questions, David.
All right. Thank you both again. And thanks everyone for tuning in, and check out Bird Bomb's Raptors for Real in late January, January 23rd. Good night, everyone.